Ethan Miller, a meticulous architect with a penchant for order, returned to his Chicago apartment after a standard Tuesday at the office. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the living room window as he placed his briefcase on the neatly arranged coffee table. He appreciated the quiet solitude of his space, a sanctuary from the city's relentless energy. As he moved towards the kitchen to prepare dinner, a fleeting movement in the hallway caught his eye. For a split second, he saw a figure entering his spare bedroom, a figure with his exact build and familiar silhouette. He blinked, his mind struggling to reconcile the image with the fact that he lived alone. Had he forgotten locking the door? Was it a neighbor? He stood frozen for a moment, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He cautiously approached the spare bedroom door, his hand hovering over the cool metal of the knob. He took a breath and opened it, the room empty and still. The window was securely latched. He told himself it was fatigue, a trick of the light playing on his tired eyes. Yet a subtle prickle of disquiet lingered, a shadow in his otherwise rational mind. Tess. Next morning, Ethan's unease from the previous evening still clung to him like a persistent draft. He tried to shake it off as he navigated the busy sidewalks to his architectural firm. However, as he greeted his colleagues, a series of perplexing comments chipped away at his attempts at normalcy. "Morning, Ethan," Mark, a senior designer, said with a slight frown. "Everything all right? You seemed a bit agitated earlier." Ethan frowned, his brow furrowing. "Agitated? I just got here." "Yeah, around 8:30, replied Lisa from the adjacent cubicle. "You had a pretty heated discussion with Mr. Henderson about the Thompson project revisions. I didn't think you two ever disagreed." Ethan's mind raced. He distinctly remembered arriving at his usual time, closer to 9, and hadn't yet spoken to Mr. Henderson. A cold feeling washed over him, replacing the lingering unease with a more concrete sense of something being wrong. He vaguely recalled a fleeting thought about double-checking his apartment door the night before, but now a more unsettling possibility began to form in the back of his mind. He needed to be sure of what he remembered, and more importantly, what he hadn't done. Throughout the workday, Ethan found himself distracted, replaying the confusing interactions in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing pieces of his own morning. Back in his apartment that evening, the unsettling feeling persisted. He decided to perform a meticulous check of his belongings, a way to ground himself in the tangible reality of his life. As he organized his desk, he noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch on his forearm just below his watch. He didn't recall getting it. He ran his fingers over the slight indentation, a faint prickle of unease accompanying the physical sensation. Later, while tidying his living room, he spotted a silver paperclip holder on his coffee table, a design he didn't recognize. He was certain he hadn't bought it. Standing in front of his bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth, he paused, studying his reflection. For a fleeting moment, a subtle shift seemed to occur in the mirrored image. The eyes looking back at him held a flicker of something cold and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to his own weary expression. He blinked rapidly, and the unsettling flicker was gone, replaced by his own tired gaze. He leaned closer, scrutinizing his features, trying to dismiss it as fatigue playing tricks on his eyes once more. But the cumulative effect of the strange occurrences was beginning to erode his rational defenses, leaving him with a gnawing sense that something was fundamentally wrong. The unsettling incidents continued to accumulate, each one a small crack in the foundation of Ethan's reality. He started paying closer attention to his surroundings, constantly second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. The usual comfort of his routine had been replaced by a pervasive anxiety. During his lunch break, he went to his regular corner, table at the Daily Grind, a small cafe near his office, As he waited for his sandwich, a familiar voice called his name. Ethan. "Hey, Ethan." Sarah, a friendly acquaintance from his building, approached his table, a slightly perplexed expression on her face. "Sarah, hi," Ethan replied, trying to sound more composed than he felt. "I saw you yesterday," she said, tilting her head. You were talking to Mr. Henderson outside the building around lunchtime. You seemed pretty upset about something. I almost came over, but you looked really engrossed." Ethan's blood ran cold. He had eaten lunch at his desk yesterday, a solitary affair spent reviewing blueprints. He remembered it vividly. "Sarah," he began, his voice tight. "I didn't see Mr. Henderson yesterday at lunchtime. I ate at my desk." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "Really? It looked just like you, Ethan. Same suit, same briefcase. Even the way you were gesturing. Maybe it was someone who looked similar." That's unlikely," Ethan mumbled, his mind reeling. Sarah's confirmation of a visual encounter, detailed and specific, sent a fresh wave of icy dread through him. The idea of a mere look-alike felt increasingly insufficient to explain the mounting oddities. He was starting to fear that the shadow in his hallway was not just a figment of his imagination. Ethan's conversation with Sarah solidified his growing fear. Someone or something was impersonating him. He knew he needed tangible proof, something beyond his own unreliable recollections and the confusing accounts of others. His rational mind, though shaken, still clung to the idea that there had to be a logical explanation, however improbable it seemed. He started his search for evidence. Methodically, he contacted the security desk at his office building, requesting footage from the lobby and the exterior cameras around lunchtime, the day Sarah had seen the imposter. He also subtly inquired with Mr. Henderson, framing the question as trying to recall a brief conversation. Mr. Henderson remembered no such interaction. The security footage was grainy and inconclusive. A figure resembling Ethan could be seen, but the distance and angle made positive identification impossible. The lack of clear evidence, while frustrating, fueled his determination. He decided to broaden his search, thinking back to any other unusual occurrences or places where his doppelganger might have been seen, hoping to find a clearer picture of this disturbing phenomenon. Days turned into a tense, anxious blur for Ethan. He found himself constantly on edge, scrutinizing every reflection, every interaction. The lack of concrete evidence was maddening, making him feel increasingly isolated and paranoid. He had confided in Sarah, who, though initially skeptical, was now a worried and supportive listener. One evening, as Ethan was reviewing the inconclusive security footage on his laptop, his phone rang. The number was unknown. Hesitantly, he answered. "Hello?" A voice, chillingly familiar yet distorted, echoed from the other end. "Enjoying your life, Ethan?" A wave of icy dread washed over him. The voice sounded like his own, but twisted, mocking. "Who is this?" Ethan demanded, his heart pounding. A dry, humorless chuckle responded. "Someone who's been wearing your shoes, someone who knows you better than you know yourself." Before Ethan could reply, the line went dead, leaving him in a cold sweat, the distorted echo of his own voice a terrifying whisper in the silence of his apartment. The call was a direct, undeniable confirmation of his fears, shattering any lingering hope of a rational explanation. This was no mere case of mistaken identity. Shaken to his core by the disturbing phone call, Ethan immediately called Sarah. His voice trembled as he recounted the chilling exchange, the distorted imitation of his own voice sending shivers down his spine. Sarah listened intently, her initial worry now tinged with a palpable fear. "Ethan, this is beyond creepy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to do something." "I know," Ethan replied, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "But what? No one will believe me. They'll think I'm having a breakdown." "I believe you," Sarah said firmly. "And after what you told me about the call, I don't know what it is, but it's real. Think back to when I saw him. Did anything specific stand out? Anything at all that wasn't quite right?" Ethan concentrated, his mind racing back to Sarah's description of the encounter outside his office building. "You said he seemed upset," Ethan recalled, gesturing a lot. "Did you hear what he was saying?" Sarah hesitated. "No, I couldn't make out the words. But now that I think about it, his movements seemed a little jerky. Almost like he was mimicking someone, but not quite getting it right. And his eyes, they seemed a bit vacant, like he wasn't really present." A flicker of understanding sparked in Ethan's mind. The subtle inconsistencies, the things that hadn't quite matched his own demeanor. Sarah had noticed them. Her recollection, now viewed through the lens of the phone call, offered a crucial piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just someone who looked like him. It was an imitation, perhaps not a perfect one. Fueled by Sarah's corroboration and the chilling phone call, Ethan felt a renewed sense of urgency. They spent the next day delving into the obscure corners of the internet and local libraries, searching for any information that might shed light on his bizarre predicament. They looked for legends of doppelgangers, tales of identity theft by supernatural entities, and folklore surrounding malevolent spirits that could mimic human form. Many of the stories were fantastical and dismissed as mere superstition, but a few threads resonated with Ethan's experience. Tales of entities that slowly replaced their victims, sowing discord and chaos in their lives, sent a shiver of dread down his spine. They found accounts of fetch, spirits, or shadow selves that could predvishad doom or even steal a person's life force. While none of the legends offered a clear solution, they painted a disturbing picture that mirrored Ethan's escalating nightmare, suggesting that he was facing something ancient and malevolent, far beyond the realm of logical explanation. The effects of his doppelganger's actions began to ripple through Ethan's life with increasing severity. At work, a crucial presentation he didn't remember preparing was riddled with errors, jeopardizing a major project and earning him a severe reprimand from his superiors. His colleagues, already puzzled by his earlier agitated behavior, now regarded him with suspicion and concern. His personal life also suffered. His girlfriend, Olivia, confronted him about a series of hurtful text messages she had received from his phone. Messages Ethan swore he hadn't sent. The content was cruel and dismissive, the language alien to his usual affectionate tone. Despite his desperate pleas of innocence, a seed of doubt had been planted in Olivia's mind, creating a palpable distance between them. Friends recounted strange and unpleasant interactions they'd had with someone they believed to be him, instances where Ethan had been rude, dismissive, or even aggressive. The social fabric of his life was fraying thread by thread as his imposter systematically undermined his relationships and reputation. Ethan felt like he was watching his life being dismantled piece by piece, powerless to stop it. The violation of his professional and social life was deeply unsettling, but the creeping sense that his personal sanctuary was no longer safe sent a new wave of terror through Ethan. He started noticing subtle changes in his apartment. Things that were slightly out of place, moved in a way he wouldn't have done. A book on his nightstand lay open to a page he didn't recall reading. A coffee mug was in the sink when he was certain he had placed it in the dishwasher. One evening, he returned home to find his spare bedroom window slightly ajar, a detail he was meticulous about checking before leaving. There were no signs of forced entry, just the unsettling feeling that someone had been inside, observing his space, perhaps even inhabiting it while he was away. He began to feel like he was constantly being watched, even within the supposed safety of his own home. The idea that his doppelganger was not just mimicking his public life, but was also infiltrating his private world, was a chilling escalation of his nightmare, blurring the lines between reality and a terrifying invasion. The subtle signs of intrusion in his apartment amplified Ethan's paranoia to an almost unbearable level. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the periphery of his vision, sent a jolt of fear through him. One night, while washing his face before bed, he glanced up at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a drawn-out, horrifying moment, the image staring back didn't feel like his own. The eyes held a glint of amusement, a predatory satisfaction that was utterly alien. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on the lips. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He blinked, and the unsettling expression vanished, replaced by his own tired and fearful visage. But the fleeting glimpse had been enough to solidify his deepest fear. The thing wearing his face was not just an empty imitation. It possessed a malevolent intelligence, and it was reveling in his terror. The mirror, once a symbol of self-recognition, had become a terrifying portal to his encroaching nightmare. Desperate and teetering on the brink of a complete breakdown, Ethan knew he couldn't rely solely on Sarah. He needed someone in authority to believe him, to offer tangible help. He considered going to the police, but the thought of trying to explain his situation, the lack of any physical evidence, filled him with a sense of utter futility. He imagined their skeptical faces, the concerned suggestions of psychiatric evaluation. Against his better judgment, he decided to approach a former colleague, David, someone he had always considered rational and open-minded. He carefully recounted the bizarre events, omitting the more overtly supernatural aspects, focusing on the incidents at work and Sarah's corroboration of seeing someone who looked exactly like him. David listened patiently, his expression shifting from concern to a polite, pitying disbelief. He suggested Ethan was likely under a lot of stress and gently recommended he seek professional help. Ethan left David's office feeling more isolated and helpless than ever. The world around him seemed determined to dismiss his terrifying reality as a figment of his troubled mind. Rejected by conventional sources of help, Ethan and Sarah realized they were on their own. They spent hours brainstorming, trying to devise a plan to expose the doppelganger. They knew they needed a controlled situation where the differences between the two Ethans would be undeniable to others. "We need something only the real you would know," Sarah suggested, tapping her finger on the table. "A memory, a detail about yourself that no imposter could replicate." Ethan thought hard, sifting through years of personal experiences. "There's a specific inside joke I have with my sister, Emily," he said finally. "It's tied to a very embarrassing childhood incident. No one else knows about it." Their plan began to take shape. They would arrange a meeting with a small group of Ethan's close friends, including Olivia and Emily. During the meeting, Sarah would subtly steer the conversation towards the relevant childhood memory, giving Ethan the opportunity to bring up the specific detail. If the other Ethan was present, they would see if he knew the joke. It was a long shot, fraught with the risk of further alienating his friends if they thought he was playing a bizarre game, but it was the only concrete idea they had. The risk of doing nothing, however, was far greater. Ethan felt his life slipping away, and desperate times called for desperate measures. They set the meeting for the following evening at a neutral location, a quiet bar they used to frequent. The following evening, Ethan and Sarah arrived at the dimly lit bar, a knot of anxiety tightening in Ethan's stomach. A few of his friends, Olivia, Emily, and a couple named Mark and Jessica, were already seated at a corner table. Ethan forced a smile, trying to appear as normal as possible despite the turmoil inside him. They exchanged casual greetings, but Ethan could sense a cautious reserve in their demeanor. a lingering echo of the strange behaviors attributed to him in recent days. Sarah subtly positioned herself to observe the entrance, her eyes scanning the faces entering the bar. About 15 minutes into their conversation, just as Sarah was skillfully maneuvering the discussion towards childhood memories, another Ethan walked through the door. He looked identical, dressed in the same casual sweater Ethan was wearing, his expression a mirror image of Ethan's strained smile. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Confusion and disbelief were etched on their faces. "What the—" Mark stammered, looking from one Ethan to the other. The doppelganger approached the table, his eyes meeting Ethan's with a chillingly familiar intensity. "Hey guys," he said, his voice an exact replica of Ethan's. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare. The air crackled with tension. The carefully laid plan was in motion, but the sheer absurdity of the situation seemed to have momentarily stunned everyone into silence." Ethan knew this was his chance. The stunned silence at the table hung heavy in the air. Ethan, seizing the opportunity, turned to Emily, his voice slightly trembling but firm. "Hey, Em," he began, forcing a casual tone. "Remember that time we tried to bake a cake for Mom's birthday when we were kids, and we accidentally used salt instead of sugar?" Emily chuckled, a fond memory flickering in her eyes. "Oh God, Ethan, how could I forget? That cake was inedible." "Yeah," Ethan continued, his gaze flicking towards the doppelganger, who was watching the exchange with an unnerving stillness. "And remember what happened when Mom tried to taste it?" Before Emily could answer, the doppelganger interjected, his voice a fraction too sharp, a subtle dissonance in the perfect imitation. "Yeah, it was a disaster. She spit it out immediately." Ethan's heart pounded. That was a general recollection, something anyone could guess. He pressed on. "But what exactly did she say?" The doppelganger's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. A flicker of something cold and alien passed across his features, a fleeting distortion that vanished as quickly as it appeared. For a split second, his face seemed slightly stretched, the familiar lines subtly wrong. His smile tightened, becoming less human, more of a grimace. She said it tasted terrible," the doppelganger replied, his voice now carrying a faint, unsettling edge. Emily frowned, looking confused. "No, that's not it. She actually said it tasted like sadness mixed with betrayal." Emily corrected, her brow furrowed with confusion as she looked from Ethan to the imposter. The real Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. The subtle slip-up, the momentary distortion in the doppelganger's features. It was enough to sow a seed of doubt in the others' minds. The doppelganger's composure seemed to crack. His eyes, moments before mimicking Ethan's familiar warmth, now held a flash of raw, malevolent anger. "What are you talking about, Emily?" he snapped, the perfect imitation faltering, a guttural undertone creeping into his voice. "Of course I remember what Mom said. You're trying to confuse things." "No, you're trying to confuse things," the real Ethan retorted, his voice gaining strength. "You're not me. You don't know our memories, our life." The tension in the bar escalated. Rapidly, Mark and Jessica exchanged nervous glances, while Olivia watched the two Ethans with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. The doppelganger lunged across the table, grabbing Ethan's arm with surprising strength. His grip was cold, unnatural. "I am you!" the doppelganger hissed, his face contorting with a fury that momentarily shattered the illusion of Ethan's features, revealing a glimpse of something twisted and inhuman beneath. A brief struggle ensued, chairs scraping against the floor as Ethan fought to break free from the doppelganger's icy grip, the fight for his identity becoming a desperate physical battle. As Ethan wrestled with the doppelganger, Sarah reacted quickly, throwing a glass of water in the imposter's face. The effect was immediate and unsettling. The doppelganger recoiled with a hiss, and for a fleeting moment his human facade shimmered and wavered, revealing a glimpse of a gaunt, shadowy form underneath before snapping back into Ethan's likeness. The Others at the table gasped, their disbelief finally shattered by the undeniable visual evidence. The doppelganger, momentarily stunned, lunged towards the exit. Ethan, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to reclaim his life, tackled him. Just as he reached the door, they crashed to the floor, a chaotic tangle of limbs. In the ensuing struggle, Ethan managed to land a solid blow, and a strange, viscous black liquid oozed from a gash on the doppelganger's forehead. The imposter shrieked, a sound that was no longer Ethan's voice, but something alien and horrifying. His body began to convulse, the features flickering wildly before settling into a grotesque, unfamiliar visage. By the time the bar patrons finally roused from their shock intervened, the doppelganger lay still, his appearance no longer resembling Ethan in any way. The ordeal left Ethan shaken and bruised, the image of the creature's true face seared into his memory. While the immediate threat seemed to be over, a chilling uncertainty lingered. What was that thing? Was it truly gone? And could it, or others like it, return? The relief of reclaiming his life was tainted by a profound sense of unease, the unsettling feeling that he would forever be looking over his shoulder, a constant reminder of the terror that had worn his face.